previous assaults on Gaza were quite vicious, but this is at a whole different level, and that says a lot about the behaviors and what's really going on in the hearts and minds of this tyrannical regime that's called Israel. It's like their last breath, so to speak. They're just trying to, if I'm going down, I'm taking everything with me type of behavior. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We always hope for the best. But for those who are a little bit younger and who aren't as acquainted with the conflict, whether they're Muslim or not, what they saw at first was a bunch of people who entered into Israel and started killing people left and right, like unprovoked. And why did they do that? And the answer is, well, it's not in a vacuum. And these pro-Zionist people, why do the Muslims care so much about this? It's just such a small land. Just leave us alone. You have all this other area, all of North Africa, the Gulf, pretty much all of Central Asia and South Asia. Why? Just give us this. And the answer is, we can't. Not because it's impossible for Muslims to live with non-Muslims. That's just simply untrue, as I'll get to in a second. But because there's something there. It's called Al-Aqsa. And it's ours. But why is it ours? When we say it's ours, what do we mean by that? Well, let's go to Surah Al-Isra, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins and says, سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this chapter by saying, glory to Allah, the one who took the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa, to the Aqsa. Now Aqsa, this word in Arabic, means the furthest, like the furthest point. And perhaps it's called that because if you look at the old world and you look at the trade routes, right, it's like the end of the Silk Road. So it's the furthest point westward before you hit the Mediterranean Sea. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why. So it's Masjid al-Aqsa. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took it, made it part of the life of the Prophet ﷺ for one moment, one night literally, take him from Mecca all the way up to Jerusalem. And then from there, what does he do? He ascends to the heavens, right? And it begs some questions. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have done that from Mecca, he could have just ascended from Mecca, right? And we believe as Muslims, Mecca is the holiest place on earth, the most beloved place to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is clear-cut in our religion. So why bother? Why bother send the Prophet ﷺ all the way there? And from there, ascend to the heavens. This is the question we need to answer in order for us to better understand why this is so important to us. And the answer is, or can be found, when we remind ourselves what the Prophet did in Jerusalem before going up to the sky. What did he do there? A little bit of trivia. He led the salah of all the Anbiya, of all the prophets. Okay, well, why? Why there? Why not in Mecca? And the answer is, Jerusalem, by Allah's decree, is a piece of land that every single prophet is connected to one way or another. Either they did their da'wah from there, like Isa alayhi salam, like Yahya alayhi salam, like other prophets, like Ibrahim alayhi salam, or they have traveled to it, like Hud, like Salih, like Shu'aib, who are of the Gulf, but there must have been a moment where they went there. And so Jerusalem essentially is the hub where all the prophets joined. But as Muslims, when we think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does Allah really care for us to be, is it really about the humans? Is it really about Ibrahim alayhi salam? Is it about Yahya and Isa? Is it about them per se? The answer is no, but rather their message. When the Prophet ﷺ led the prophets, all of them in Jerusalem, it was a signal to him and to everybody that the Prophet ﷺ is the leader of humanity. But a leader of what? A leader in religion, in theology. So it's signifying that the Prophet ﷺ is the epitome, the zenith of theological discussion. And that leading all the prophets means that all of them are behind his theology. Or to reword, all the prophets came with the same theology. And so the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, Al-Anbiya awladu allat. The prophets are children who have the same father, but different mothers. They have the same father, but different mothers. What does he mean by that? The father represents the theology. Every prophet came with the same theology. And look at the Quran. Allah sent Nuh alayhi salam with what? U'budullah, ma lakum min ilahin ghayru. Worship Allah alone. Hud said the same thing. Salih said the same thing. Shu'aib said the same thing. Ibrahim alayhi salam said the same thing. Allah says every prophet was sent to call people to la ilaha illallah, to tawheed. Right? So they're all children of the same father. They all have the same theology. The mother is referring to the sharia, the logistics, the laws behind it. So when the Prophet ﷺ was sent to Jerusalem, it was meant to establish that relationship and to signal to the world, whether they believe it or not, to signal to the world that this man is continuing that which Isa ﷺ preached, that which Musa ﷺ preached, that which Ibrahim ﷺ preached, that which Nuh ﷺ preached. And Jerusalem is kind of like the ground zero throughout human history as to where the da'wah spreads from. Now, as a side point, Jerusalem in the old world is really the crossroads of the world. If you're going from west to east, you're bound to pass Jerusalem. If you're going from north to south, you're bound to pass Jerusalem. All of the major trade routes went through Jerusalem. It's a central place. And so the strategy behind it, the wisdom behind that, is that Allah put theology and the da'wah in a place where people are constantly passing through and people are being, they're traveling there. So Jerusalem is significant to us because it is the place where our theology is spread, where the history of our theology is rooted in. And we as Muslims, obviously we believe that the Christians and the Jews no longer have this theology. They no longer represent the message of the prophets. They have remnants, they have residue of what the prophets came with, but the essence, the soul, no. The Jews are no longer following Musa alayhi salam, and the Christians are no longer following Jesus. They are following adulterations of their messages. So for the Muslims, we'll never let it go, period. Right? They need to get it through their mind, the Zionists. We will never let it go because our prophets from Adam alayhi salam to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam are connected there. And that land is a land of theology. And so when the Zionists come and say, God promised us Jerusalem, we hear this, right? This is the promised land for the Jews. And the Christians come and say, it's their promised land, God promised it to them. My response to that is what? Why did God promise that land to them? Based on what? Based on the fact that they're Jew, ethnically speaking? Well, we as Muslims, we know Allah could care less what your ethnicity is. When He says it straight up in the Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ. You're different nations, you're different tribes. And our Prophet ﷺ said, an Arab's not better than a non-Arab, and a non-Arab's not better than an Arab, and a black is not better than a white, and a white is not better than a black. You are all from Adam, ﷺ, and Adam is from dirt. In other words, Allah didn't give them that land because of their ethnicity, which they claim. They say, because we're ethnically Jew, this land is ours. No. Allah gave that land to the children of Israel pre-Prophet ﷺ because they were holding on to the truth, the message. And so when they let go of that message, when they disbelieved in the Prophet ﷺ, is it theirs now? The answer is no. Because you are no longer followers of Musa ﷺ. By rejecting the Prophet, they have rejected Musa ﷺ. By rejecting Isa ﷺ, they have rejected Musa ﷺ. And so Allah doesn't play favorites. You're not born with an advantage. It's not the way it works. Rather, it's about your actions. It's about what you believe in. So that land belongs to the people who hold the true message of Allah, and that is the believers. Now, this doesn't mean we exclude anybody else. Throughout history, as I'll get to in a second, Jews have always been there. But we'll get to that in a little bit here. So they have this claim, it's their promised land, and therefore they can go and get it. And all that argument is nonsense. It's quite comical. It's a type of bubble that they're living in. And we're going to say, we could care less. And they come and say, for example, look at the Quran. When I say they, I mean the Zionists who promote this ideology. They'll come to the Quran and say, look, your God says, وَفَضَّلْنَاكُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. You say about the children of Israel, God has preferred them over humanity. And the answer is very simple. This phrase in the Arabic language is not temporal. It's not transtemporal. It doesn't go over time. It means at that particular time, they were the best. And we have no problem with that. But again, why were they the best? Because they were of a certain ethnicity? The answer is no. But rather because they were following their prophets. They were following La ilaha illallah. They were following the Sharia of Allah. That's what made them the best. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. And therefore, when they disbelieved in the Prophet, when they rejected it, they lost all of that. Right? Even though they're still ethnically of the same ethnicity. Right? So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the Prophet ﷺ to Jerusalem to signify this. But now let's take a step back and look at the history of Al-Aqsa. When did it start? What was some of the history's ups and downs of it? And you'll find that a lot of the history of Jerusalem is mentioned in the Quran, but not in a very direct way. You kind of have to dig in and find these points as you read the Quran and you read these stories. Al-Aqsa was built by Ibrahim alayhi salam with his son Ishaq. Mecca was built by who? The Kaaba was built by who? Ibrahim and Ismail. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, the Kaaba is the first masjid, as the Quran says, and then Al-Aqsa was after that. How many? 40 years. So within the lifetime of Ibrahim ﷺ, he built the Kaaba with his son Ismail, his eldest son, and then he built Al-Aqsa with his second son Ishaq alayhi right? And Ishaq has his son Yaqub, and Yaqub has a bunch of children, and his children begin to have children. One of his children is Yusuf alayhi salam. And just to paraphrase all of this, Yusuf alayhi salam is thrown in a well by his brothers and then taken to Egypt, and then he grows, he becomes the minister of Egypt, and then he's reunited with his family. And at the end of the surah, what does Yusuf alayhi salam tell his brothers? Go back and bring all of your families. Right? وَأْتُونِي بِأَهْلِكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. Come with all of your families. So they all migrate to Egypt, right? So which begs the question, if this is your land that you so boast about, why did they leave? If that's where they're meant to be, like this is the promised land, why did they leave? Right? Has nothing to do with the land, it has to do with the theology. So Yaqub and his children all go to Egypt, and then the years pass by, and then Fir'aun comes. And the story of Fir'aun, the chronicle between Fir'aun and Musa alayhi salam, that's why they were in Egypt. And then Musa alayhi salam is sent, he battles Fir'aun ideologically until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saves them. And then they wander in the desert for 40 years until the next prophet comes, Yusha bin Nun. And Yusha then takes the believers of that time into Jerusalem through battle, etc. And then you have many years of peace. And then they start going back, they start becoming sinners, they start neglecting their religious obligations. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends upon them the Bukhta Nassar. I forgot how to say the name in English. Basically, somebody out of Iraq comes and pretty much decimates Jerusalem. And here's the story of Uzair in Surah Al-Baqarah. أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها. In Surah Al-Baqarah. Like the one who passed by a village, commonly believed to be Uzair, the Prophet Uzair alayhi salam, passed by the village, meaning Jerusalem. And it was in utter ruins, destroyed by this army from Iraq. And while that's going on, the children of Israel were taken to Iraq as slaves, and then they get released, and I'm just paraphrasing all of this, and they start making their way back to Jerusalem. And here is the story of David and Goliath, which is also mentioned in the Quran. Remember how they pass by a river and they can't drink from that river? That's the River Jordan, the Jordan River, right there. And then they go back, and then the kingdom of Dawood alayhi salam and the kingdom of Sulaiman, which is also mentioned in the Quran. And then the years go on, Isa alayhi salam comes, but by the time Isa alayhi salam comes, the Romans have taken over Jerusalem. And the Jews make a deal with the Romans. They say, we will obey your laws, and we will divert any armies trying to get to the Roman Empire. So we're kind of the first buffer, the first line of defense for the Roman Empire. In return, they say, if the rabbis agree that somebody has committed apostasy, we want you to execute that person. And the Romans say, we agree. That's the agreement. And so when Isa alayhi salam came and started making da'wah, what did the rabbis do? They said, this man has made the Sabbath legal. He has committed apostasy. So they send it to the Romans come, they want to execute it, and then the crucifixion happens, and we have our own narrative to that, and they have their narrative. And then the years go on, and Constantine, becomes a Christian, and then wants to get revenge from the Jews for killing Isa alayhi salam, and so they go and they just annihilate the Jews in Jerusalem, and literally Jerusalem is a dump, literally a dump. And then the years pass by, the Prophet ﷺ comes. And then the Prophet ﷺ passes away, and then Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala and his armies are going up to the north, and they open Jerusalem. And then when Khalid ibn Walid, the general of the army that opened Jerusalem, goes to get the keys of Jerusalem, the priests refused to give it to him. And they said, in our book, we are told who we are to give the keys to. You don't fit the description, they tell Khalid. So bring your Khalifa. So Khalid ibn Walid writes to Umar al-Khattab and says, man, they won't give me the key, you have to come up. So he goes up, and we know the story. He's riding, him and Abu Ubaidah are going together, and then they switch periodically to be fair to each other. And so when they actually start entering Jerusalem, Umar is walking while Abu Ubaidah is on the horse. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala, his clothes are worn out, they're ripped, they're patched. Right? He looks like somebody coming off of the streets, as we would say. And so Abu Ubaidah tells him, Ya Umar, Yani Khalifa, just get dressed into something nicer and come on the mount. I mean, it's inappropriate for the leader to be in this case. And then Umar tells him the very famous statement, Abu Ubaidah, we were the worst of the worst, and Islam made us the best. If we were to leave Islam, no longer care about it, no longer to practice it, we will go back to being the worst. And so they enter, and when the priests see Umar, they said, yes, that is the description that we have. A man with worn out clothing, patched up, walking while his servant is on the mount. And they give him the keys. And at that time, the Christians banned Jews from living in Jerusalem. And what does Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala do when he hears about that? He not only lifts the ban, he writes to Jews and says, come and live. And this isn't just me saying this. These are Western historians who say this, right? So this whole narrative of, they can't live, they won't live with us, they can't live side by side, and this utter nonsense. The state of Israel, understand something. Look at the psychology. The state of Israel is built around a narrative where we are in constant threat, we are the victims. right? As you know, we've all seen the Bassem Youssef, Piers Morgan interview, yeah? Right? He said it the best. I've never seen a victim who bombs their oppressor 24/7. And understand what this means. They need an enemy, or else their entire narrative makes no sense. If the world sees, wait a minute, everybody's friendly to Israel. Why do they keep saying, oh, we're under threat, we're under threat? They lose their narrative. And so it's like they need an enemy. Right? And so Umar radiallahu ta'ala an lifts the ban, invites Jews, and from that time until the events of late, Jews have always lived in Jerusalem. Always. And you know what? There are documentations, videos of very elderly ladies who said there was no such thing as Israel. There was no such thing as this and that. We're all, she's a Jew saying we're all I was a Palestinian Jew. And then these people come in and they start saying, no, we're this and that. They created a division. And there are many pictures of this. There's a picture of one individual saying, look, we used to babysit each other's kids, the Jews and the Muslims, pre-Israel. So Muslims have always known how to live with non-Muslim neighbors. Till this day. Right? The narrative, Ben Shapiro narrative, we've tried to be friends with them, we try to make peace with them. It's all nonsense, it's lies. How many of us know that there are Jews who live in Morocco? Moroccan Jews. Jews who live in Iran. Jews who live in Yemen. Jews who live in Turkey. Jews who live in Ethiopia. Have we ever heard the Jews saying, we're being oppressed, we're being attacked, the Muslims can't stand us, the Muslims abuse us, the Muslims oppress us? Have you heard this? Absolutely not. Right? So they create this narrative where they're out to get us, and Hamas's whole mission is to eliminate all Jews and whatnot. It's all propaganda. All propaganda. Right? So now we get into these times. And an ideology is created called Zionism. Zion literally means homeland or home. Zionism is like the movement to homeland. And what's very interesting is the founder of this movement, Herzl, what's his name? Theodor Herzl. He says in his book, like he has books, he literally says it. Yeah, we were considering 3 places: Uganda, Argentina, and Palestine. Which tells you what about the ideology? It's not Judaism. It's not. It's a secular movement. It's an atheistic movement. It's a political ideology. They just wanted to find a land for the Jews, and it doesn't really matter where. You know, it's funny, when you see these videos on YouTube and you go to comments, there's this one lady, a Ugandan lady, she's like, oh my God, they would have been by us. That would have been terrible, right? Why did they choose Palestine? Well, because the Jews see that they have a connection to it. It's like it's not even that much enthusiasm. Like, yeah, we can convince Jews from around the world to come here because, hey, we could say this is your holy land, this is your holy land. Right? So you could see the propaganda. You can see how this isn't about Judaism. It's just about a political ideology. And in his book, he even says, man, all these Western countries are doing, colonialism. Why don't we do the same thing? It's a colonial movement. And they can't stand when we say this. They try and suppress this to the best of their ability. I'm sure you've seen this in the back and forths of social media. Right? So they start coming in. And at that time, the British were occupying, they had colonized Palestine. But we need to understand, why did the British colonize Palestine? Why do you all think they did this? What is it?
Crusade.
The Crusade? Okay, so it's for religious reasons?
Yeah, of course. They came, the general, when he came to Jerusalem, he came on a specific day. I don't remember what was significant, but he went to the grave of Saladin and literally kicked the grave, and he said, I'm here. So there is a history behind it.
Okay.
Why British took specifically Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Now remember, by this time, the Western world has been enlightened. Right? Enlightened. They really don't care about religion. And even if some of them cared about religion, there's a Congress now, there's a parliament, there's a Senate. You can't just do things. You need to convince those in charge that this is the proper thing to do and we should put, huge sums of money on this. The reason why the British wanted Palestine had nothing to do with religion, but rather because of its proximity to the Suez Canal. The British, their main colonized area was India. Why was it so important to them? Because back then, the oil of back then was spices. Where does all the spices come from? From India. So if you have India, you have what we'd call today oil. You got the money right there. But the problem was, in order to get from the UK, from Britain, to India, with the Ottoman Empire there, what did they have to do? They had to go all the way south around Africa. And that takes a long time. But if they can take Palestine, now they have access to the Suez Canal and they can literally bypass 2/3 of the trip. Because through the Mediterranean, down the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea, you're in the Indian Ocean, right there. That's why they wanted it. But the Ottomans were still there, so what can we do? The Ottomans are still a formidable opponent. What can they do? What can they do? Well, there are these people called the Hashemites. Yeah, I heard some giggles. The Hashemites, who have just been defeated by these other people called the Saudis, and maybe we can get a deal with them. Now, at that time, the Ottomans were starting to build the Ottoman identity. They have shed the Islamic identity. Now it's the Ottoman identity. It's more ethnic. And now it's pushing the Arabs away from that empire. And now the Arabs are saying, wait, if they have an Ottoman identity, we want an Arab identity. Nationalism starts entering. And so the British meet up with the Sharif Hussein, the great-grandfather of the current king of Jordan, right? And they say, look, if you help us fight the Ottomans, we'll give you Palestine and this land. You could be the Khalifa. He agrees to it like a fool. And so they have the Arab Revolution, and pretty much they backstab the Ottomans. This is why so many Turks hate the Arabs, because of this history. Right? And now they were successful in the revolution. They pretty much cut the Ottoman Empire from the Arab world. And what does British do? They say, yeah, we're not going to give you what we agreed on. Pretty much now they stab their back. Right? And so British has Palestine. But the problem is these Palestinians are so stubborn. Again, to quote Bassem Youssef, as many times, they just don't die. You try and kill them, they just don't die. And so the British are like, man, this isn't worth it. But we've created a conflict. I mean, what can we do? Well, there's a Zionist stuff happening. We can kill two birds with one stone. We can get rid of these Jews, because who oppressed the Jews most throughout history? Well, Europe, the West. We can get rid of them, and we can put them with the Palestinians, and we can start, we can give the conflict to the UN. You take care of it, UN. Right? And there's a lot of history here. I don't want to go into all the details. And then the conflict erupts. Now, what you hear in the media today, they killed a bunch of babies, And let's just be very clear here. As Muslims, we must be just. Allah tells us, be just even if it's against your own self, your own family, your own people. The intentional targeting of civilians and non-combatants is haram, period. Period. However, everything they accuse the Palestinians of, the Muslims of, they are guilty of. They killed babies. Why don't you go back to Deir Yassin? Just Google Deir Yassin images. And you'll find a bunch of dead babies. Who killed them? There were no bombs back then. There was no long-range combat back then to say, just casual collateral damage. No, you literally had to kill them point blank, face to face. 750,000 displaced people, a lot of whom went to Gaza, right? And it's just this continuing effort to occupy, to occupy, to occupy. And what we see now is an attempt to finally occupy the entire region. They're angry at Hamas, fine. Okay, why are you attacking the West Bank? What are you doing in the West Bank? What does Hamas have to do with the West Bank? You see the contradictions. They see an opportunity to, once and for all, in their minds, completely take over Palestine. And their goal is one of two things. To either displace every Palestinian that remains, send the 2 million of Gaza to Egypt, and however million is in the West Bank, send them to Jordan. Or we'll just kill them all, because America has given us the green light. This is really the goal. Now to go back to Surah Al-Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَضَيْنَا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the children of Israel, there will be 2 times in history where they gain much political might, and they use it to create a lot of corruption. Now, just to be clear here, the Quran doesn't go out of its way to be very specific, like what we do a lot. Right? So when Allah says the children of Israel, He doesn't necessarily mean everyone from within the Jewish faith. Clearly, that's not the case. But from within the Jewish faith, there will be people who do this. All right? When was the first time? When was the second time? Have they happened, etc.? Well, the first time, Allahu A'lam, was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Meaning their first ulu, their first political might was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, specifically referring to the tribes, the Jewish tribes in Arabia. And in there, they created proxy wars. They would move this tribe, they would move that tribe, they would cause problems between the pagan Arabs and whatnot. They had a lot of money, they would fight with each other. They did a lot of fasad, but they had a lot of power. Right? But before we go on, I ask you all the question. Why were they there? Why were these children of Israel, who are ethnically from where? From the Middle East. Why were they in Arabia? They were waiting for the Prophet. They were waiting for the Prophet ﷺ, or else why would they go down there? Why would anybody go there at that time? It's a desolate land of just Bedouins. Why did they go there? Well, apparently, in their books, it says the last messenger will come out in an area where there's a lot of palm trees by the Arabs. And so where do they go? They go to Medina, they go to Khaybar, and they go to Fadak. Why? Because these 3 cities are full of palm trees. So they go there and they wait for the last messenger. But the last messenger comes and they reject him, as Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah. Why did they reject him?
From them. He's not from them. He's not a Jew.
He's not from them in what sense?
He's not the lineage of Ishaq.
Because the Prophet is from Ismail alayhi salam, not from Ishaq. They rejected him. That's why. And you're hearing now, you've probably seen on YouTube, and these clips, YouTube and whatnot, these pastors and these priests coming out and saying, the Arabs are doing this because they're jealous of Ishaq and they're jealous of their lineage and whatnot. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. We don't buy into this lineage stuff, right? We buy into the message. We follow the Prophet not because we are of his descendants. It has nothing to do with that. I mean, look around you. Not everybody here is an Arab. And not every Arab is from the lineage of Ismail. We follow him because of the message. And therefore, we see ourselves equally connected to Ishaq, to Yaqub, to Dawood, to Musa, to Sulaiman, as we do with the Prophet ﷺ, because we follow the message. So they come, these pastors and whatnot, and they say, they're jealous and they're within internal fighting and whatnot. We say it has nothing to do with that. Rather, as one pastor said, right, we have fallen into the lineage of Isaac because we have adopted Jesus. It's not like a biological lineage, but rather a spiritual lineage. Okay, we follow Isa alayhi salam. Can we be part of the lineage too? Right, so these lies are coming out. I also want to make sure that you see them for what they are, utter lies, and they're irrelevant to the conversation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ أُولَاهُمَا بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا أُولِي بَأْسٍ شَدِيدٍ. When the first problem comes, when the first event happens, Allah will send upon them strong people. Who are those strong people? The Prophet and the companions, alayhim salatu wassalam. And they were victorious over them. And then Allah says, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا لَكُمُ الْكَرَّةَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَمْدَدْنَاكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. Then Allah tells them, we will give you a second moment where you are stronger than them, where the children of Israel are stronger than the Muslims. And Allah says, I will give you wealth and I will give you children. They have a lot of money and they're more in number than in comparison, relatively speaking. And then Allah says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. Pay attention to this. Nafir istinfar is when you call other people to help. Right? So, if something's happening and I come in, I say, hey, everybody come, help. And you all get up. That's istinfar. So Allah tells them, we will give you a lot of support from the outside, like America, like the West, like Europe, etc. They just say, hey, we need help, and everybody goes. Right? In 2 days, the West sent America sent their ships, their battleships, in 2 days. Right? أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then they will fail the second time. And the Muslims will enter the masjid. وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. And they will enter the masjid the way they entered it the first time. Meaning the Muslims will re-enter Al-Aqsa the way they entered it the first time during the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. But pay attention to the wording here. The wording is very beautiful in these verses. Essentially, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking in a way where He's telling the companions, you're going to enter it a second time. But it's obviously not them. What does Allah mean by that? What it means is once the Muslims become like the companions again, they'll enter that masjid. That's what it means. And so we see what's going on today. It's a very difficult situation. We don't know what's going to happen, but that's okay. The Prophet ﷺ, before the Battle of Badr, he didn't know what was going to happen. He literally made dua. He said, oh Allah, if we're defeated today, no one on earth will worship you. The Prophet himself ﷺ didn't know if he was going to be victorious. When the Battle of the Trench happened, the same thing. Wallahi, they did not know what's going to happen. And we don't know what's going to happen. We hope for the best. But we have to play our part. And from here, I want to shift. Well, what can we do? What can we do? And there's a lot that we can do. There really is a lot. One of the reasons why the Israeli government is able to do what they do is what? Because the West allows them. And when we sit and look, within a day, universities, companies, schools, corporations are giving their solidarity letters. And we're sitting there looking, like, what is going on? They didn't do this for Ukraine. When do companies make political statements? When do universities make political statements? Yet, within an instant. The question is why? Why are they so adamant on doing this? Why is it that Congress is biting each other's necks over every single little issue? Yet on this, no, they're all in agreement. Yes, yeah, subhanallah. What's happening? Well, you got to understand the strategy. Understand the strategy. The Prime Minister of UK right now, Sunak, do you know his family has a business that is based in Israel? Okay, so what? Well, if Israel goes, what happens to his business? And if he's making millions of dollars a year off of that business, he doesn't want it to go away. Okay, whatever you want. Or maybe in his mind, if I don't do what they want, they'll close my business down. Which begs the question, is that the strategy in the first place? In other words, it seems like it's actually quite clear. The way this works is there is a lot of monetary exchange between the Zionist party and Americans or the West, where they will open opportunities for individuals to make money through there, and then they will pressure them to do their bidding. Or they'll come at them and say, if you don't make a statement, we'll call you anti-Semitic, we'll call you. Once at my masjid, we held a political forum where we called the candidates from the Republican and Democratic parties, for the congressmen and whatnot, those who were running for Congress. And we allowed them to have a debate, we asked them questions, etc. One of them, he made a statement, he said, yeah, the Jews have a lot of power in Congress, right? The next day, I get an email from a certain group saying, this candidate has made anti-Semitical statements and it's going viral. It's going viral? Right? We recorded the debate. So I look at the YouTube videos. This isn't going viral. It barely has dozens of views. What's going on? So I Google the guy's name, and next to it, anti-Semitic. And then you see an article. I Google it again 15 minutes later, another article. A third article. And by the way, it's pretty much copy-paste, same article. Right? This is how it works. Why am I telling you this? Because we need to understand this in order to know what we do. Our battle is here. Our battle is here. And so how do we go about doing this? 3 things. Number 1, social media. Understand, we don't have money to compare with what they have in terms of money. But we have way more numbers. Muslims are 2 billion. How many Zionist supporters are there? Nowhere near that. No, it's not even a fraction of the percentage. And why is that important? Because on social media, we can literally flood the comment section. We can manipulate the algorithm. Piers Morgan comes and says, you know, I've been the one who's invited the most pro-Palestinian voices. Right? You hear him say this? Yeah, he did. But why? From the goodness of his heart? When you look at the videos of the pro-Palestinians, they're in the millions. And when you look at the videos of the pro-Israelis, they don't even reach 1 million. Now he's making part 2 with Bassem Youssef. Well, why, man? That video got 20 million views. 20 million. He wants to get another 20 million. That's the way it works. So numbers matter. You go to social media, start an account, and start just reposting these videos that are in favor of Palestine. Flood it. Assume that most Americans have no idea what's going on. And it's obvious once you actually get some of the information, some of the details. But those who don't know, they have no idea what's going on in that region. All they see is Netanyahu or Naftali Bennett coming out on CNN and saying, oh, they're doing this. And, oh my God, these people are crazy. Right? Yeah, they're like ISIS and whatnot. Until they start realizing what's going on. Right? We have the numbers. So flood social media with this stuff. Of course, all within the bounds of what's legal. Don't post anything that's illegal. Don't say anything that's illegal. That's not the goal here. Our purpose is to be muhsinin, to be people of excellence. Social media, get to it. Right? The next is the companies. I think we focus too much on candidates and politicians. But these politicians are funded by people. Who funds them? Well, the companies. McDonald's comes out, we're with Israel, and Starbucks and all these different companies, we're with them. Okay, McDonald's, you're all across the world, aren't you? You're in Pakistan, you're in India, you're in Jordan, you're in Egypt, you're in all these places. We're 2 billion people. We're a quarter of the world. And if Muslims boycott you, you've lost 25% of your revenue. Your donors cannot make that up. They can't. They cannot give you donations that will suffice for that, can they? So if we work together and start promoting, pushing this, boycott McDonald's, boycott McDonald's, boycott McDonald's, boycott McDonald's. Why? Because they promote genocide. Make a flyer, put McDonald's logo on it, and show the pictures of the IDF doing their thing, being so cruel to children. Translate in all the different language of the Muslim world and say, we're McDonald's, this is what we support, this is what we endorse. And just start sharing it on social media. Very easy, right? But to them that makes a difference. Because what do they really want? They're not taking moral stances. They're just playing the game. They want the money. So the second thing is we need to know how to deal with these companies. And again, all within the confines of what is legal. And then number 3, right? We need to educate. We need to educate. And we're winning that battle, by the way. You cannot compare. They cannot bring out propaganda as quick as Muslims are just reposting and putting. They can't win that. So we need to educate the community. We need the American public to see that the support of this current government as is completely unacceptable, completely unethical. Biden had a meeting with leaders of the Arab Americans or Muslim Americans to discuss what's going on. This wasn't made public. But 4 days before that, he had a meeting with leaders of the Jewish community, and it was public. The question is, why is it public for the Jews and private for the Arabs? And why is he even meeting with the Arabs? Why? Someone tell me, by how many votes did Biden win Michigan last election? No, it was more than that. It was 11,000. How many Muslims live in Michigan? Hundreds of thousands. He could very easily lose that state. That puts pressure on him. We don't have the money, but we have the numbers. And if we work together, we can flip states, literally, the states that we have a strong presence in. Do you know how many Muslims there are in Southern California? 700,000. 700,000. I don't know, maybe 1 million in the entire state. That makes a difference, right? So Zionism is able to do what it's doing because of the support of the West. We are in America, and we have certain constitutional rights, legal rights, that can be effective tools if we use them properly. And again, I re-emphasize, because I don't want some, civil rights group coming or some FBI coming saying you're promoting, no, right? Be the better, maintain the moral high ground, and use what is in your legal capacity to do. And if we organize, then we need to, as I was saying, Zionism is able to do what it does because of the support from the West. And even whatever happens there, so long as Zionism has root here, the problem is still there. The threat is still there. Our role is to uproot it from this country and doing it in a way that is legal. So with that, I'll stop bid'Allah ta'ala. I'll open it up for Q&A. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to really bring stability and peace to that area. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, calm the violence. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ease the plight of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. If there are any questions, please.